Introduction. Chapter 1. The Key of the Gnosis. Every thoughtful student of the literature of the ancient religions, including that of early Christianity, cannot but be impressed by the fact that in each and all of them may be found very clear intimations of a secret traditional lore, an arcane science, handed down from times immemorial. This secret body of knowledge is repeatedly alluded to in the New Testament and also in the Upanishads and other ancient writings, in whose pages a few of the arcane doctrines are cautiously unveiled. And from the meagre glimpses thus afforded of the system, it is clearly apparent that it was essentially the same in all the old religions and philosophies, constituting, in fact, their common esoteric basis. In the primitive Christian Church, organized as a secret society, this gnosis, or secret science, was guarded with jealous care, being imparted only to a comparative few who were deemed worthy of initiation, according to the maxim, quote, "Many are called, but the few are chosen." Through corrupting political influences and the ultimate dominance by a selfish and decadent priesthood, the Christian society in the early centuries lost this esoteric knowledge, in the place of which there grew up during the succeeding centuries a system of dogmatic theology formulated from the literal interpretation, the dead letter, of the books of the Old and New Testaments, on the hypothesis that the Bible, as a divine revelation, contains a record of God's dealings with mankind throughout the ages. The historical element in it has been unduly emphasized, while books that are purely allegorical and mystical have been construed as history. For several centuries, it was attempted to give the apocalypse an historical interpretation, and failing this, through the lack of any record of past events that would serve the purpose, it was next interpreted as a history of the future, that is, prophecy. At the present time, the apocalypse is the despair of theology. The ablest scholars in the ranks of orthodoxy frankly admit that it must be regarded as an unsolved and possibly insoluble enigma. They translate its title, quote, Revelation, yet it reveals nothing to them. Literally, apocalypse means, quote, disrobing, or, quote, unveiling. But Isis, wrapped in her peplum, was not more safe from profane gaze than is the meaning of the apocalypse, nor is any book in all literature more heavily veiled. Yet, the apocalypse is the key to the New Testament. More, it is in very truth the key of the Gnosis. Incomprehensible as the book may seem to the exoteric scholar, however great his intellectual attainments, keen his mental acumen, and vast his store of erudition, to the mere title In the sacred science, the general meaning of the apocalypse is perfectly clear. It is unintelligible to the conventional scholar, simply because its subject matter, veiled in symbolical language, relates to the mysteries of the early Christian society, the esoteric teachings which it was not lawful to reveal. For secrecy has always been maintained regarding the sacred science, so as to guard it from those who are morally unworthy to receive it, since the power its possession confers would be destructive to them and injurious to their fellow men. But so far as concerns the apocalypse, this reason does not apply very forcibly. Much that is given in it had already been clearly and openly stated in the writings of Plato, with which the apocalyptist was evidently familiar, and of other Greek initiates, as well as in the Buddhistic and Brahmanical scriptures. Moreover, although the Apocalypse treats very fully of the spiritual and psychic forces in man, it nowhere gives even a clue to the process by which these forces can be aroused to action. In fact, in the introductory part, Johannes clearly intimates that it is intended for the guidance of those who, without any esoteric instruction, find these forces awakened within them by the very purity of their nature and the intensity of their aspiration for the spiritual life. Evidently, then, he had another motive for resorting to the symbology and the ingenious puzzles which have baffled the profane for so many centuries, and this motive is easily perceived. If he had written the book in clear language, it would almost undoubtedly have been destroyed, and it certainly would never have found a place in the Christian canon. Again, from the concluding portion of his Evangel, it is plain that Johannes, the great seer and initiate, clearly foresaw the fate of the Christian Church and its loss of the esoteric doctrine. It would seem, therefore, a reasonable supposition that he wrote the Apocalypse for the purpose of preserving that doctrine in the Christian records, carefully concealing it under the most extraordinary symbols, checked off by a numerical key and by similar, quote, puzzles, so that the meanings could be conclusively demonstrated from the text itself, and concluding it with a dread imprecation against anyone who should add or take away anything from the book, a device which has undoubtedly helped to preserve the text from mutilation, and having thus, with marvellous ingenuity, prepared the book, which is unique in all literature, he confided it to the keeping of the exoteric church, confident that in their ignorance of the real nature of its contents, the exotericists would carefully preserve it until the proper time should come for its meaning to be explained. If this was his purpose, as the present author firmly believes it was, then this present time, when modern biblical criticism, scholarly accurate, conventionally exoteric, and remorselessly unsparing, has demonstrated the unsoundness and instability of the venerable theological structure, and has so undermined it that it seems to be tottering to its fall, would appear to be the intended and appropriate time for the seals of the Apocalypse to be broken, and the contents of the book made known. Thus it is that Ioannis, quote, who bore witness of the Logos of the God, and of the witness of anointed Jesus, has borne witness of the esoteric doctrine which underlies not only Christianity, but also all the religions of antiquity. Through the long centuries, the Orthodox Church has treasured this mysterious book, designed for the undoing of orthodoxy, as part of its sacred scriptures, a place to which the book is justly entitled, for it is the masterpiece of Ioannis, the seer. It is unquestionably from the same hand that penned the fourth evangel. Tradition is quite clear on that point, and though its Greek is somewhat inferior to that of the evangel, the difference is due merely to the more intricate and artful composition of the Apocalypse. While both works reveal the same inimitable mental traits and unmistakable literary peculiarities, that they are by the same author, and that the text is practically intact, is the view of sober-minded biblical scholars, a reaction having set in against an erratic school of criticism, which is now generally discredited as being an instance of scholasticism running riot with untenable theories and whimsical conjectures. Now, in plain words, what does this very occult book, the Apocalypse, contain? It gives the esoteric interpretation of the Christos myth. It tells what Jesus, the Christos, really is. It explains the nature of, quote, the old serpent, who is the devil and Satan. It repudiates the profane conception of an anthropomorphic God, and with sublime imagery, it points out the true and only path to life eternal. It gives the key to that divine Gnosis, which is the same in all ages, and superior to all faiths and philosophies, that secret science, which is in reality secret only because it is hidden and locked in the inner nature of every man, however ignorant and humble, and none but himself can turn the key. It is impossible for the Gnosis itself ever to be, quote, revealed from the very nature of it, for it pertains to the realm of the spiritual mind, and lies beyond the scope of mere intellection, which can never rise higher than speculative philosophy. But the key of the Gnosis, the scientific method by which this higher knowledge may be attained, can be placed in possession of anyone who is intuitive enough to appreciate its value and apply it in practice.